It is 2 a.m. in New York, 7 in London, and 4 on a Wednesday afternoon here in Seoul. Welcome to the newscast. I'm Kim Hyun-ji. The government has unveiled a set of measures to deal with the worst personal data leak by financial institutions in Korea's history, with millions of people affected. The Financial Services Commission, Korea's financial watchdog, announced the measures Wednesday. Financial institution staff will now face stronger punishments if client data is found to have been leaked. Tougher regulations will be imposed on financial firms to prevent them from sharing client data with their affiliates. The financial regulator also said financial institutions could be fined up to 1% of their sales in the event of a data breach. The government says it now suspects that the recent bird flu outbreak may also have been carried by a migratory bird called the bean goose, in addition to the baikal teal ducks originally blamed for bringing the virus to Korea. The Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs said in a press briefing Wednesday morning that H5N8, the same AI strain found in the baikal teal ducks, was detected in the carcasses of bean geese found near a reservoir in Gochang County in Jeollabuk-do Province, where the outbreak was first detected. The ministry added that the number of farms in Korea infected with avian influenza has now increased to 8, and that 6 other farms are being inspected for signs of the virus. Staying on the bird flu scare in Korea, quarantine authorities are working round the clock to contain the avian influenza in the country's southern province of Jeollabuk-do, where 8 farms now are believed to have been hit and nearly 300,000 ducks and chickens have been slaughtered so far. Our Connie Lee brings us this story from the field.
The quarantine measures have been taken up a notch. 3 days have passed since the first confirmed case of the highly pathogenic H5N8 bird flu strain was found here in southern Korea.
The infected farms are blocked off like this. This means no one can come in and no one can get out.
And it doesn't appear as though the quarantine measures will be eased anytime soon.
이상 절대 들어오시면 안 되고 이 안으로는 들어오시면 안 됩니다. 이게 공기종으로 떠다니는 바이러스들이 활동이 떨어지기 때문에 소도 그레스도 바로 또 전염이 될 수가 있으니까 얘가 저주기가 바로 돼 있잖아요. 새들이 자주 날아다니니까 한번 공기종을 떨어뜨리면 바로 전염이 되니까 항시 이렇게 자주 해줘야 될 상황이 됩니다.
Here in Jeollabuk-do Province, about 300 kilometers south of Seoul, every vehicle entering and exiting the area is sterilized. But with a new suspected case emerging on Tuesday, the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs has now ordered that ducks within a 3-kilometer radius of an infected farm be slaughtered as a preventive measure. This has been expanded from the previous 500-meter radius. But the farmers aren't the only ones affected by the latest case of avian influenza.
None of the customers are asking for the duck and chicken dishes, even though I explained to them that cooked meat is fine.
This restaurant has seen its number of customers cut in half since the AI outbreak.
This time is worse than the last bird flu scare we had. My restaurant was affected last time, but this time, because the virus was found in my neighborhood, less people are coming to eat here.
Korea has had 4 bird flu outbreaks since 2003. The last time was in 2011, when over 6 million birds were killed. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
While Korea is worrying about its own bird flu outbreak, other countries in Asia are having their own problems. Different bird flu strains than the one identified in Korea have killed several people in China and Vietnam. Our Kwon So-ah has the details.
With more and more people coming down with bird flu in China, authorities there say the virus could infect and kill more ahead of the Lunar New Year holiday. The World Health Organization said this week that the number of confirmed bird flu infections in China is fast approaching 50, with the number of infected people doubling in the space of a week. Health agencies say the number of infections could explode toward the end of the month when millions of Chinese people set off to their hometowns to celebrate the Chinese New Year. Officials say 2 people in Shanghai, a patient in his 70s and a medical worker in his 30s, died of the highly pathogenic H7N9 strain of bird flu last Saturday. 2 people in Hong Kong succumbed to the same strain earlier this month. A 52-year-old Vietnamese man died from the H5N1 strain over the weekend, the first bird flu death in the country in 9 months. A Canadian national said to have been infected during a trip to China also died of the same strain earlier this month. The WHO expects this trend to continue for the next few months since the cold weather helps to circulate the virus. 385 people have died out of around 650 confirmed H5N1 infections since an outbreak in 2003. At least 45 have died from H7N9 since 2013. While it's widely known the virus can be transferred from birds to humans, some scientists fear the virus could mutate and make human-to-human infection possible. There has not been a single case of human infection so far of the H5N8 strain of bird flu that has appeared in ducks in Korea. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
President Park Geun-hye is in Davos for this year's World Economic Forum. Ahead of the forum's official opening, President Park spent the day meeting with business leaders from around the world to urge them to invest more in Korea. Our presidential correspondent Oh Jin-ju, who's traveling with the president, has the details.
Promoting Korea to the world's business leaders was the name of the game for President Park on the eve of the World Economic Forum in Davos. Taking part in Korea Night, an event dedicated to showcasing Korean culture and technology, which has been held in Davos for 6 straight years now, President Park called on the world's most powerful executives to look for investment opportunities in Korea's so-called creative economy. She promised to ease regulations on investment, except for ones that are truly necessary, to foster a better environment for foreign businesses.
이처럼 기업 활동을 하는데 최적의 환경을 만들고 세계 기업들이 한국에 마음껏 투자할 수 있도록 문화를 개방하고 있습니다. 여러분들도 한국에서 도약의 기회를 잡을 수 있기를 바랍니다.
Among the global figures attending the event were Lloyd's chairman John Nelson and Jacob Frankel, chairman of JP Morgan Chase International. President Park also met with Cisco CEO John Chambers.
I've wanted to meet you for a year now. Thank you for giving us the time.
And discussed ways to cooperate in the sector of Internet of Everything.
특히 요즘 한국에서도 사물 인터넷에 대해서 주목들을 하고 얘기를 많이 하고 있습니다.
Internet of Everything is a rising industry that aims at connecting objects in homes, offices, cars, and elsewhere to the Internet, so they automatically adjust to people's needs and preferences. President Park asked Cisco to actively invest in Korea and closely work with Korean firms to help the nation realize her vision of a creative economy. Chambers said Cisco's joint project with the British government to develop the European country's high-tech industry is very similar to President Park's vision. He then said he would be very happy to expand cooperation with Korean institutions and companies in the sector. President Park will be making an opening speech on the creative economy and entrepreneurship in the first session of this year's World Economic Forum on Wednesday. She will also pitch Korea's qualities to the CEOs of global companies like Qualcomm, Aramco, and Siemens. Oh Jin-ju, ARIRANG News, Bern.
Back here in the nation, the former chief of Korea's spy agency, Won Se-hun, was sentenced to 2 years in prison on Wednesday for taking money under the table from a businessman while in office. The Seoul Central District Court also ordered Won, who headed the National Intelligence Service under President Lee Myung-bak, to pay a fine of some 160 million won, or roughly $150,000. The former chief was found guilty of taking some $150,000 in kickbacks from the former head of now bankrupt Hwangbo Construction for helping the company clinch major construction deals. Let's take a look at how the market closed here in Seoul. Shares traded higher this Wednesday, although they remained nearly flat in the morning thanks to a rise in straight purchases. At the closing bell, the benchmark Kospi gained 0.3% to finish at 1970, while the tech-heavy Kosdaq climbed 0.4% to 523. The Korean currency closed at 1,067 won against the greenback. The International Monetary Fund has upwardly revised its growth forecast for the world economy for the first time in nearly 2 years. But it also warned the world of deflation risks. The IMF added that falling prices will put a damper on consumption and increase the burden of debt, a serious problem for highly indebted countries like the United States and the Eurozone. For more on the dangers of deflation and how serious it is, we are now joined by Dr. Kim Byung-ju, the head of KLMP Consulting and a regular commentator on this program, who is with us on the line. Hello, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
We know the IMF chief recently warned that there is a danger of worldwide deflation. What was she saying exactly?
Right. What Christine Lagarde was saying last week in Washington was that there's a problem in terms of like a lost focus for central banks around the world. What she was saying was that central banks around the world are focusing on increasing inflation, having inflation pick up in terms of its speed. But then again, by focusing only on inflation, they are losing the focus on the possibility that actually worldwide there could be deflation spreading around. And she was saying that actually, many of the central banks are now thinking about dealing with the overall excessive liquidity, and in doing so, they're trying to slow down overall pace of their boosting measures. And she's saying that could be actually dangerous because there is a certain and considerable risk for the deflation worldwide. Deflation itself is, of course, triggered by falling prices. That falling prices itself results from the companies trying to sell more of their products and goods to the consumers who are not buying actively. But while doing so, what happens is, they damage their own business performance and weaken their overall stance. And that actually could result in fewer jobs, higher unemployment, and further losing of the buying power on the consumer. So that's basically vicious circle we're talking about, and this is not something that we've been seeing for quite some time. And leading academics like Paul Krugman and Larry Summers also have been talking about the possibility of this deflation spreading worldwide.
I hear that they are talking about the possible return of the Great Depression that the world saw some 80 years ago. How is this related to the deflation fears we now have?
Actually, the 80 years ago, 1930s, the worldwide Great Depression was triggered by deflation, we have to say. And that's what Paul Krugman, Larry Summers, and Christine Lagarde were all saying basically here. And, of course, the Great Depression was triggered by the financial market shock, but that decreased overall the financial standing of the companies and damaged the buying power of the consumers. And so by doing so, overall markets, lost their bottom, and their bottom fell off, and the people were just not buying things. And this is basically the whole phenomenon of deflation, if you will. And that's exactly what the world is concerned about. I wouldn't say, we actually face a real danger to have that experience of Great Depression repeated here, but just keep in mind that Great Depression itself was a form of deflation-triggered phenomena. I think there is a legitimate concern to that.
All right. Well, Europe seems to be the main area of concern for now, at least. The European Central Bank seems to be facing the criticism that they are not countering the deflation risk forcefully enough.
Right, indeed. That seems to be what's happening. What happened was Mario Draghi, the head of European Central Bank, was saying recently that they're going to keep their target rate at the same place, and they're saying, Europe is not going to actually see Japanese-style deflation. We just talked about Great Depression, but Japan is another country that has experienced a deflation phenomena for the last about 20 years, if you will. So the Mario Draghi was saying that Europe is not like Japan, and they're not going to repeat the same kind of mistake. But observers are saying that Europe saying that they're not going to face a danger of deflation itself is a naive posture, and that has concerned a lot of that has triggered a lot of worries. The problem is European Central Bank, their interest rate is already very low at 0.25%. So it is understandable that they don't have much further down to go in terms of cutting rates. But then again, observers are concerned whether European Central Bank is just losing their focus.
Well, what about the situation in Korea? I imagine it would be fair to say that the Korean public likes stable prices. So it seems like you could also say that Koreans cannot really forgive inflation, but deflation is a different story.
Right, indeed. I mean, it is true that consumers actually like the stable prices, but if we can bring up numbers for the producer price index on the screen here, basically what's happening is the producer price has been falling for the last 15 months, and that is a reasonably strong indication for remote possibility of prices falling, because producer prices are the leading indicators. So what you see in the producer price may actually be realized in consumer price. So looking at these numbers by themselves, economists are a little bit concerned whether actually deflation would be a real concern for Korea in the long run.
And what is the likelihood that we will see deflation here in Korea?
The thing is, views vary here, but Bank of Korea has been continuously saying we're not going to see that. Basically, what we have here in place is triggered by the supply side, low oil price for one. But other economists are saying, but still, because of the household debt that we have had in place for a long time, and we have to be very careful about it, and we have to continuously watch how Korean companies are doing in terms of their business. If their business goes down further, then there is enough serious considerable concern for possible deflation. So for now, views are divided.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Kim, for joining us today. We will talk to you again tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says North Korea is signaling that it's ready to resume the long-stalled six-party denuclearization talks without any preconditions. But other member nations are asking for the North to first demonstrate its sincerity. At a press conference in Moscow on Tuesday, Lavrov said Russia is working closely with China for an agreement and added that related countries should also make reaching a deal their top priority. The comments come amid a major peace offensive by the North following the execution of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's once powerful uncle, Chang Song-taek, last month. The multilateral dialogue involving the two Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia, has been at a standstill since late 2008. A Korean media outlet has released a confidential report proving that the Japanese Navy and university medical schools conducted brutal experiments on living people during wartime. The top-secret reports were stored at Japan's parliamentary library. Our Son Jang-in has a story.
This is a confidential report by the Japanese Navy exposing medical experiments conducted during World War II on living people. The report details an experiment on the absorption action of iperite, known as mustard gas, which rots human skin.
This is a dissertation based on a medical experiment on living bodies to develop protective army clothing.
It is part of a trove of documents stored at Japan's National Diet Library and released by a Korean media outlet, proving that Japanese army and university medical schools conducted gruesome medical experiments on war prisoners and civilians while they were still alive. It is the first evidence of such experiments having been conducted by institutions other than the infamous Japanese military Unit 731 in China. The documents also revealed that medical departments at 9 imperial universities in Japan during that time carried out similarly brutal medical experiments.
Even after 1930, the cruel experiments continued at other Japanese universities. Unfortunately, Unit 731 wasn't the only one to conduct experiments on living people.
One of the most notorious cases of human experimentation involved 8 members of a U.S. Air Force B-29 crew. The experiment was conducted in 1945 from May to June at Kyushu University in Japan. The American prisoners were subjected to vivisection and other gruesome experiments before being killed. Professors and students from the university were later brought to trial on charges of wrongful removal of body parts and cannibalism. None were convicted of war crimes. The Japanese government has yet to comment on the revelation and has thus far only ever acknowledged the existence of Unit 731, not the experiments it was reported to have conducted. 손정인, ARIRANG News.
Syria is being accused of systematic killings and torture on a truly ghastly scale. A report detailing the Assad regime's atrocities was released Tuesday as delegations began arriving in Switzerland for international talks aimed at ending the bitter conflict. Our Park Ji-won reports.
The new report reveals the Syrian government's systematic use of execution and torture. A team of former international war crimes prosecutors released their findings and ample photo evidence to back their claim that the Assad regime tortured and killed about 11,000 detainees.
We came to the conclusion that the killings were of an industrial kind, such that the evidence we found would certainly underpin any count of a crime at international law.
The photos were taken by a former Syrian military police officer who has since defected and fled the country.
The pictures were reminiscent of the worst pictures that came out of Belsen and Auschwitz after the Second World War. And these poor creatures were not just starved, but they were also tortured whilst they were starving.
Reacting to the report, the U.S. State Department condemned Syria in the strongest possible terms, saying the photos show apparent actions that would be serious international crimes. Britain's Foreign Secretary also expressed shock and horror at seeing the report.
I've seen a lot of this evidence. It is compelling and horrific. And it is important that those who have perpetrated these crimes are one day held to account.
Meanwhile, the world's leading human rights advocacy group has slammed the international community for not doing enough to end the atrocities being committed in Syria. In its annual report released on Tuesday, Human Rights Watch said world powers have focused too much on bringing President Bashar al-Assad and his government to the negotiating table and put aside humanitarian matters such as the protection of civilians.
What I hope the people gathered in Geneva will do is not simply to try to work out a long-term peace deal, but in the interim to put pressure on the Syrian government to stop targeting civilians, to stop deliberately depriving civilians of humanitarian aid.
The group also criticized Syria's close allies, Russia and China, for turning a blind eye to the humanitarian crisis in the country. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
Much of North America and Europe has been struck by unusually cold winter weather this season. The northeastern United States has been slammed by yet another snowstorm that shut down government offices in Washington. And northern Europe is in the grips of a cold snap that is expected to cause temperatures to plunge even further this weekend. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
It's cold out there in both the U.S. and Europe. A winter blizzard slammed the northeastern United States on Tuesday, shutting down government offices and grounding thousands of flights. The U.S. National Weather Service said that the storm, packing strong winds of up to 60 kilometers an hour, has dumped more than 30 centimeters of snow across the northeastern states. U.S. government offices in Washington were shuttered, while city offices and schools in several states were also closed. Residents in the affected areas have been warned not to travel during the storm, and about 3,000 flights were canceled and more than 4,000 delayed, causing chaos for travelers. The storm comes just 2 weeks after the polar vortex brought heavy snow and record low temperatures to much of the nation. And over in Europe, several countries have been hit by a bitter cold snap. Temperatures fell to sub-freezing levels in the middle of a winter that has been relatively mild until now. According to Germany's National Weather Agency DWD Tuesday, temperatures in northeastern cities, including Berlin, are forecast to plummet to -14 degrees Celsius this weekend. Fallen trees and frozen train tracks have made rail services difficult nationwide, while trains were also delayed for several hours. In the midst of the deep freeze, more than 130 accidents have been reported. 2 people died on Monday near Niendorf on the Baltic coast after their cars collided on an icy road. Sweden and Norway have also seen their temperatures plunge to below -40 degrees this week. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Let's now get a quick check on the weather conditions around the world. And that does it for now. More news updates coming your way on Early Edition at 6. Do join us then.